What do this train, this train, this train, and this train have in common?
Well, they are all electric multiple units, so called because there are multiple powered units, unlike the old-timey locomotive-pulled trains, and well, because they're electric. We usually just call them EMUs or multiple units.
Essentially, while a traditional train only has power flowing through the locomotive's wheels, with multiple units you have tons of powered axles, sometimes in motor and trailer cars, and sometimes just distributed throughout the train.
EMUs are lighter at each axle because they distribute equipment across the train. They can ascend steeper slopes and accelerate faster because of all of those powered axles, which is why a subway train feels so much faster than many of the older trains people are used to, and they are reliable. EMUs have taken the world by storm. They've been running up and down subway lines for over 100 years, but nowadays they're the de facto standard for suburban and regional trains, and even intercity trains. Most of the high-speed trains out there are EMUs.
And while EMUs are great, the benefits of distributed traction and self-propelled cars means that even diesel multiple units have taken off in Canada and the US. So then why is Toronto, a city spending tens of billions of dollars to try to get onto the leading edge of public transit, including with the biggest project of all, the modernization of the GO network, not moving to use this world standard technology? As it turns out, it probably should be. If you like activism-esque videos like this or my Shepherd Subway one, consider supporting my channel on Patreon, or better yet, buying a subscription to my Substack. You can also subscribe for free, and most articles are provided for free. It helps me put together these bigger, more complex videos that I otherwise probably couldn't. The GO expansion project is rushing ahead, with new tracks, stations, and structures being built across the GTHA at a rapid pace. And as I discussed in a video last year, Metrolinx has actually planned up with a team of companies, most notably Deutsche Bahn, the German national railway operator, to undertake the expansion of service and electrification of the network. Now, at the time, perhaps clouded by the excitement of the project moving forward, and perhaps because I was a little concerned the project might not move forward, I sort of accepted the announced plans to not use EMUs and instead use electric locomotives with the existing bilevel cars. To be fair, this is an improvement. We're going from diesel to electric, which means way less emissions, and electric locomotives are a lot higher performance.
But given the cost of the project and the fact that works are looking like they're going to take longer than expected, I think it's worth asking, why will Toronto's new regional rapid transit system use what are in some cases 50-year-old train cars?
The more I dive into it, the more it seems like the reason we are keeping the bilevel cars is the cost of getting rid of them and the fact that we have so many. At the moment, perhaps unsurprisingly, Toronto is the largest operator of the bilevel coach, and it has over 900 of them. And having a uniform fleet with a single type of car is kind of nice from an economies of scale perspective.
Cost is also probably a big factor in why we're planning to keep using the bilevels. Entirely new EMUs might be affordable in Europe and Asia, but because in North America we often use non-standard designs and have local production requirements, the cost can be a lot higher.
There is also this sense that the bilevels can be modernized, and have their layout reworked to make them more appropriate for rapid transit. For example, by moving some seats around and opening up more space for people to stand. This is something I have actually talked about in older videos. There is also the not insubstantial issue that if we were to start buying EMUs, we wouldn't have anywhere to store them, and a new yard would be very expensive. Maybe at the end of the day, because of Toronto's sprawling nature and the fact that this is really truly the first modern electric regional rail project being pursued in North America, that bilevels are actually just an okay solution. But I can't accept that. Something feels fishy. Toronto is planning to have very high-frequency mainline rail services, and high-frequency mainline rail services the world over use EMUs. From the famous Paris RER to suburban and regional trains all across Europe, to Copenhagen and Italy and Spain and Tokyo and Seoul and Bangkok, EMUs are the standard. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, as with all things in life, there are exceptions. Zurich does operate some of its S-Bahn services with locomotives and bilevel carriages. But in reality, Zurich is actually planning on phasing out those locomotives and carriages, and in reality, Zurich also runs lower frequencies on most of its corridors than Toronto is planning to. a rare Canadian passenger rail W?
What's perhaps most notable is that DB, who I'm really excited we hired to set us straight here in Toronto, doesn't use locomotives on any of its major S-Bahn systems.
And before you say, oh well, that's because Toronto is a sprawling metropolis, unlike German cities. As it turns out, there is another country, a land down under, if you will, where every single major city has an electric suburban rail system. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. In fact, the Aussies even use EMUs for some of the longer distance services. There are basically as many EMUs in Australia as there are emus, which are commonly confused with EMUs. And if you're in the 0.5% of people from New Zealand who watch my channel, well, Auckland and Wellington also have EMUs. The idea that Toronto has discovered something that none of these other cities have discovered is unlikely. The laws of physics are the same, and cities like Sydney, Auckland, and Melbourne are sprawling places. And in fact, even in America, EMUs are common on high-frequency mainline rail services, from Philadelphia to Denver and the suburban train systems in New York, not to mention New Jersey. Caltrain in the San Francisco Bay Area is also doing a similar modernization program to Go, albeit less extensive, and even it is kitting EMUs, while Go is not.
And that's a big problem, but a fixable one. We can still choose to move to EMUs now instead of whenever we decide it's a good idea.
For one, we have a lot of bilevels, but a lot of them are very old, pushing 50 years. And that also kind of hurts the single car in the fleet argument, because the bilevel cars, while they are all bilevels, were delivered in a number of series that all do have differences. And it's worth pointing out that Go also does operate different types of locomotives. Probably worse than their age. I mean, the bilevels are in pretty good shape because they spend half of their time parked, at least historically, is the fact that the bilevels have a layout that just doesn't work for rapid transit. You've got two narrow doors, a very long car, and terrible passenger circulation. And that means if you watch a Go train at a stop, if more than a few people are trying to exit, it takes forever. Some cities like Paris and Sydney do use double-decker cars on frequent service, but they have way wider doors and they're placed on the middle level so that people can circulate more easily. In Paris, the cars even sometimes have 3 doors.
A potential argument you could level against the performance and weight benefits of EMUs is that, well, we've already, for better or for worse, built a rail network with super gentle grades that can be handled by freight trains. And this is true even if it's wasteful. But we have more grade separations and flyovers that we need to build.
One will be needed on the Kitchener line to enable higher frequency all-day service. And the same will probably be true for trying to operate high-frequency service to Hamilton on the Lakeshore West line in the distant future. But hopefully not so distant. At the same time, as I talked about in this video, a big part of why we seem to be planning to run the network the way we are, which is with separate express and local lines, is because we don't want to spend the money on the grade separations necessary to have a bit more of a flexible New York City subway style of different service patterns on different routes. That's not to mention that we're going to need to build more flyovers if we want to operate services like the Milton line with high frequency in the future. Not knowing that we're moving beyond something like the bilevels and locos means not being able to plan more cost-effective and quick-to-build infrastructure for the future. And then there's the Up Express, and we're always going to want some form of lighter and more nimble train for that service, even if the line is becoming more integrated with Go Transit service, as reporting several years ago suggested. The reality is that the Union Pearson Express viaduct to the airport has incredibly sharp curves. Terrible design oversight, by the way. And for some reason, we're deciding to make the same design mistake with the extension of the Lakeshore East line to Bowmanville, but that's probably a different video. These super tight curves on the Up Express mean that our existing diesel multiple unit single level trains crawl along through the airport grounds. And that means every person that comes to Toronto to visit gets to experience modern rail travel in Canada. It's very slow a lot of the time. Ultimately though, using bilevels here just wouldn't make any sense. And it would be moving in the wrong direction, disrupting what is actually already a very popular service that just needs more trains.
In this case, multiple high-floor multiple units from Stadler, who now builds European-style trains in North America, Alstom, Siemens, or any other company with shorter cars are probably the best answer. You can electrify the existing route and slowly phase them in to ramp up service. And once you have enough of them, you could even extend services onto the Lakeshore East and Stouffville lines by splitting the trains, perhaps akin to how some S-Bahn services or the Narita Express in Tokyo work. The shorter cars and better acceleration might even make the curves at Pearson slightly less of an embarrassing introduction to the city.
The issue of not having a yard to store trains is real, but that's a problem we should be solving now, not when land gets even more expensive near GO lines in the future. The cost is also an issue, but a completely overplayed one. EMUs are not cheap, but GO expansion is a more than $10 billion project. New trains recently purchased for the Stuttgart region cost about 4 billion Canadian dollars for 130 100-meter-long EMUs, pretty similar to what GO Transit would need, and a drop in the bucket in terms of the amount of spending we are doing in Toronto on public transport. Of course, this needs to clear a cost-benefit analysis, but if it can't, I'm not sure why. The cost of getting rid of old existing railcars is not high. Old railcars do not tend to have that much value, which is why cities tend to get new trains every couple of decades. Suggesting Toronto needs to keep the bilevels to save money while we're simultaneously spending tens of billions on subway expansions and tens of billions on regional rail feels like buying a Ferrari but asking that they put a smart car engine in it. It's just meaningless, pointless, almost performative austerity. And that's because the real cost here is the opportunity cost. Not having EMUs means slower service and more expensive infrastructure. We don't seem to have realized that, but the rest of the world has. With a lot of grade separations in recent memory costing tens, if not into the hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not hard to see how you could recover $1 or even a few billion dollars just by making them less expensive. At the same time, if we were to have EMUs, we could stop making the ridiculous claim that locomotives are fine for the station spacing that we have today, and actually build more urban stations in places they obviously should go. GO corridors, which are generally old freight corridors, are often surrounded, surprise surprise, by big industrial sites that can be redeveloped, and you're already seeing this in places like Scarborough, East Harbour, and the like. It seems pretty obvious to me that the government could recover the cost of EMUs several times over by simply just building some new stations near major development sites and opening them up for development. You don't need to eat up land in the Greenbelt, just redevelop some big old industrial sites. At the same time, there is a ton of existing density that is near GO train lines but doesn't have stations, like Spadina, which I covered in a previous video. Now, before you comment about having far too many stops slowing down your GO train commute, EMUs would be faster, and we also do have express tracks on our main corridors, so slower travel isn't an issue. Probably the most exciting thing about EMUs is that since they aren't all that different from subway trains, there would suddenly be tons of extensions that we could start building if we were to convert the network over. For example, a diversion through Pearson Airport that actually continues to Brampton and Kitchener, a new connection to Mississauga City Centre, and potentially even lines connecting other GO lines to one another. These kind of projects wouldn't make any sense with bilevels, but they're the type of thing that you see all over the place in German cities. We talked about a bunch of them in our recent video on Stuttgart. Basically, the current plans may seem less expensive, but they lock us out of so much of the benefit that electrifying and modernizing GO Transit brings.
In summary, the current plan doesn't incentivize us adding tons of new stops, which could easily bring billions of dollars of development and reduce car travel, pollution, and congestion, saving the public money. They also make the grade separations we know we need to build more expensive, which means we do less, not capturing the benefits of more reliability, safety, and a better network. They also lock us out of potentially attractive extensions that just won't work with bilevels for a generation. And they'd frankly mean worse performance and less attractive transit, as well as no new trains to signify this huge new era for GO. Probably biggest of all, it reduces potential frequency. There's a reason that places like Munich that run trains 2 minutes apart don't use locos, and we don't do that in Toronto on the subway. If we want GO to be frequent like a subway, it needs to use trains that are more like those on the subway, even if they aren't laid out the same. Of course, the decisions we're making probably don't make GO expansion a bad project, but it pushes back the biggest benefits a generation, and probably means more cost today and tomorrow. If we really want to catch up to the great cities of the world, we need to do better. And so here's what I think Toronto should do. Metrolink should find an EMU and diesel or battery multiple unit platform from one of the many rail manufacturers out there. Alstom could probably even build them in Canada. These trains could be low floor and completely intercompatible with bilevel platforms, no problem. So initially, when phasing them in, you could even operate them mixed in with bilevels, even with level boarding, if we ever get on that. Leave a comment if you think I should make a video on the status of level boarding. I imagine something similar to the X60 trains of Stockholm would be a perfect fit for Toronto. This arrangement would also mean in the long term that you would have just 2 models of single-level trains in your fleet, simpler than today, and you could combine them into longer trains for higher demand services, while splitting them apart easily to run more service and reduce operating costs. We could also have models with more or less doors, best suited to the type of service they would operate on. Rapid transit models would have more doors and less seats, while the diesel or battery trains used on outer sections of the network in the interim and running on wires on the intersections could have more seating and fewer doors. The fleet would be more standardized than today, but with better performance and an aesthetic that doesn't scream 1980s era commuter trains. They could also be designed to be more accessible, and by simply lowering the platform at Pearson Station, you could use a single fleet of trains across the entire GTHA network. Single-level EMUs would also mean we could build subway-like tunnels to extend the regional train network to new destinations, using restricted-length trains if necessary to reduce the cost of stations. Being able to do grade separations faster and less expensively would also mean more service to more places. Ultimately, Toronto moving to EMUs massively ups the potential for a network for Toronto that isn't just Go++, but is actually an entirely new regional rapid transit system, like BART, or even better, a real German S-Bahn. Thanks for watching.